name is Malcolm. You want to know what the best thing about childhood is? At some point it stops.
When Malcolm in the Middle premiered back in 2000, it broke ground as the most watched premiere in Fox television history. But how is it that even though it was one of the most highest rated shows of the early 2000s, it became one of the most underrated sitcoms? As a kid, I always thought this show was good. As I became older and caught wind of all the jokes, it made me realize how clever the show really was. And I don't think there's ever been a show that's quite like it. The show was a massive hit and was praised for its smart writing, the talented cast, and its subversive take on the traditional sitcom format. Because it wasn't exactly what your average sitcom was, as it changed the landscape for what a sitcom could pull off in a half-hour time slot. And here, I want to explain what makes the show so different than other sitcoms and why so many people still remember the show, with the first reason being the realism. I'm gonna be honest, I feel like there's something about Malcolm in the Middle that was far different than other sitcoms. Instead of being filmed on a set like most sitcoms of the past decade, it was shot from a single camera perspective, being able to move more freely with the shots. That's why locations like the family home and the Lucky 8 felt more real because they were actually filmed in real locations. And the show did so much by taking place at different locations, instead of just being set in one house, making it feel more realistic, instead of having the same old repetitive backgrounds from other sitcoms. It's also worth noting that Malcolm in the Middle is often regarded as being one of the first major American sitcoms to ditch the laugh track, making it a little easier to see it grounded in reality. It proved it could still be popular even though it didn't include a laugh track. Instead, they relied on natural comedic timing and features of Malcolm breaking the fourth wall.
Wow. Usually we don't get someone storming off from the table until after pancakes.
Hence, without a laugh track, audiences were still able to have a pleasant experience while watching Malcolm in the Middle. And these characters were able to generate laughter to the audience, making it feel more relatable. Which comes down to the second reason, which is the relatability. Instead of depicting a happy, perfect family, the creator of the show, Lin Boomer, wanted to realistically portray a dysfunctional family that was based on his own. He would often recount stories about how his own dad would get into sticky situations, and his overall mother would have to manage the family. And there was those stories that he would use when he would pitch Malcolm in the Middle. And watching it as a kid and teenager, I think most kids can relate to the three boys, Malcolm, Reese, and Dewey, and the things that we did when we were all kids. Things like fighting with your siblings, misbehaving at home, getting yelled at by your parents, and always being up to no good. But as you rewatch it when you get older, I feel like adults can start to relate to characters like Francis, and even start to relate to Hal and Lois. And I think people can relate to the things that we all go through as adults, having all the stress and responsibilities of having a job, paying bills, and trying to manage a family.
You know, I think that's why a lot of people like the show, is because they can relate with the family. You know, it's not like, oh, I wish my family was like that. People go, oh, that's what my family does, you know, and they like that they can see it on TV.
These characters felt familiar and more relatable to his audience, which comes down to the third reason, which is the characters. Although the show mostly focused on Malcolm, as the show went on, we got to know more about the rest of the family. You had Lois, who was the hardworking, strict mother. Then you had Hal, who was the more laid-back and kind-hearted father. Then there was Francis, the oldest son who was sent off to military school for being a teenage delinquent. And the three other brothers stayed at home and attended a public school, leaving Malcolm to be the middle child. The show was really treated his characters as having their own quirks and flaws, making these characters relatable and endearing to the audience. And there was a highly talented cast that delivered memorable performances, especially Bryan Cranston as the goofy and eccentric dad. What I liked best about Hal to me was that he wasn't like the average TV husband and father, like others that came before him. The type that would drink beer, sit on the couch and watch TV, or kinda had like a love and hate feeling for his family and treated his wife bad. Hal was actually passionate and cared about his family and supported his wife. Even if he wasn't the sharpest knife in the drawer and acting like a normal grown man-child, he was never afraid to show his emotions or any vulnerability. And all this made him more realistic and a better role model.
Al, did you replace that light bulb in the kitchen?
What does it look like I'm doing?
And Lois, being the head of the household, though she usually came out as a hothead and a real control freak, usually spending most of her time yelling at her boys and ready to punish them. As an adult, I think most people can start to warm up to her and see that she was just a hardworking mother that cared about her kids more than anyone. Even if she was a bit of a hard ass and expressed it in the most brutal way, I think she was just a real badass mom, and I think Jane Kasmerick did an amazing job playing her, but it was also her rage that easily made her one of the funniest running gags in the show.
Are you Aborigines? I have had it! Fire? Fire? Whose damn dog is this? I said, whose damn dog is this?
But honestly, my most favorite character on the show was the oldest son, Francis, and the first of the long line of troublemakers. He was my favorite because of what he reminded me of myself when I was a teenager. In many of the episodes, Francis was usually the B-plot and usually had his own storylines, starting off at military school in the first 2 seasons where he remained rebellious, where he then emancipates himself and moves to Alaska in season 3, where he meets his future wife. And as the show advances, we would start to see Francis grow from being a rebel teen to a mature, responsible adult. That's why I feel like Francis was the one who had the best ending and was also an inspiration to all the eldest brothers out there.
I love you so much.
And then there's Malcolm, the star of the show, as well as the narrator, who Boomer actually based on himself, as he was the middle child with 4 brothers. One of the things I always found entertaining about Malcolm was his intensity to break the fourth wall, even when his narrating is the least relatable, where most of the jokes would come from Malcolm, and he would explain his thoughts and issues to the audience, and think he was being really smart, often hurting others with the smart mouth comments, and getting himself into trouble for not being able to hold his tongue.
No, I was being sarcastic. I was kind of saying that you're the opposite of a genius.
So, you were calling me stupid?
Yeah, and that's why
Then there's Reese, the second oldest brother of the family. Though often the most misunderstood one, and usually seen as the dumb one, Reese still has the same charm as his brothers and is a true genius when it comes to causing trouble, bullying, and just overall tormenting his younger brothers, even though he protects them at school in the most meanest way. For example, in the episode Old Mrs. Old, Reese tries to convince and force Dewey to take a regular backpack to school instead of a purse to save him from getting an ass kicking. Now that's a good older brother right there.
I don't care. I like it.
Give me that.
No.
You don't know what these animals are capable of.
Let's go.
I'm trying to protect you.
But probably by far the most complex character on the show was the youngest brother, Dewey, as we watch him grow from being the youngest innocent boy in the family to a young teen. Even after Jamie's birth, who didn't really add much to the show, Dewey is still very much reflected as being the youngest child in the family, but also was the most overlooked by the family and an easy target for Reese and Malcolm to torment him. But once Jamie comes along at the end of season 4, he does end up acting more like a normal caring brother towards Jamie, and also breaks the generational cycle of tormenting the younger brother. This is why I think Dewey displayed the greatest depth and also grew the most as a person, even at times showing to be smarter than his brothers.
Dewey, give us the key now.
Nope.
All right, Dewey. We can either do this the easy. Oh! No fair. That's just what I was gonna do.
These characters developed over the course of the show, and it was kind of like character development you didn't see in most sitcoms. And that comes down to the fourth reason, which is the smart writing. Part of what made this show so different than other sitcoms was how it had clever episode plots and didn't rely on lazy situations. Malcolm in the Middle abandoned the traditional sitcom structure of an A and B story, and instead gave each character their own storylines, which each episode usually ending with no solution ever resolved, and the family finding itself in more trouble than before. Some of my favorite episodes are episodes like the babysitter episode, the mini bike episode, traffic jam, emancipation, traffic ticket. I could list so many episodes that are my favorites, but if I had to pick my most favorite episode, it would definitely have to be the bully from season 2, where Reese gives up his role as a school bully after he gets beaten by a girl, completely demoralizing him. This then changes the natural order of things at school, like Reese not being able to defend Malcolm and the other current boys from the other bullies, who are fed up by Malcolm's sarcastic remarks. This then spurs Reese to reclaim his former position by taking on the new bullies, proving that he's the best at what he does.
Thanks. Reese?
Starting tomorrow, you're back doing my booking words.
Sure.
This was actually the first episode of Malcolm in the Middle that I remember watching as a kid, and I feel like it gave me a perfect introduction to who these characters were. Reese was the bully that would beat up little kids, and Malcolm was a smart-ass kid that would make fun of whoever was around him. And even Francis' storyline about him wanting to come home for his birthday to avoid getting his whole body shaved is very entertaining, which I don't get why he just didn't make a run for it when he had wide open space and there was no one behind him. If I had a date with a hot nurse on my birthday, there's no way I would have let them shave my body, but I guess it was way funnier this way.
So, how's that reflection pond, Francis? Cold. And when's your date? 20 minutes.
The feel of the show. Another thing that made the show so unique to me was how different it felt from other traditional family sitcoms. Malcolm in the Middle had a lot of cartoonish sensibility, comedic set pieces, and throwaway gags, a lot like The Simpsons but with his own style. Like in The Simpsons, they could show more exaggerated gags, like Homer strangling Bart, which is much easier to animate because it's a cartoon. And I feel like Malcolm in the Middle did that, but in live action. Like obviously, you didn't see them doing things like strangling their kids, but you saw the family was always arguing and getting yourself into crazy situations that was seen straight out of a cartoon. That's why I feel like this was probably the closest thing we ever got to a live action Simpsons.
It's a live action Simpsons.
Drink your milk.
Lumpy.
Then chew it.
And another thing I really love about this show, and this is why I feel like the show is so underrated, is how much it really reminds me of that time period, which is the 2000s, when I was a kid as well and I was about the same age as the boys. Back when we didn't have phones, we didn't have social media, and it just reminds me of things that I did when I was a kid in that time. Like, you would sit down and watch TV, see whatever was on, or you had a PlayStation 2 with a couple of games, and even seeing the furniture and the TV set of the house, it just looks so much from that time. And I remember when all the kids would go play outside, and I just feel like we don't really live in times like that anymore, where even kids were more social. And there's even things that I feel like kids these days probably wouldn't even understand or relate to from this show. Like this scene from the second episode where you see the mom is about to destroy the TV. Like things like getting your toys taken away or getting your TV privileges taken as punishment. It's just something I feel like kids probably wouldn't relate to today. Because I feel like kids these days don't really play with toys anymore, or even watch TV, and this show is just a perfect representation of early 2000s television, and it's just a really nostalgic time to look back to, and it just makes you realize how good we had it in the 2000s when times were simpler, and I would just do anything to go back to living that time. Over the years, there has been rumors and speculation about Malcolm in the Middle getting a possible reboot, but no official confirmation has been given at this time. The show's creator, Lin Boomer, has spoken about his thoughts on the reboot. He said, "I think it would be amazing, but I don't want to do it." Frankie Muniz has also said before that Bryan Cranston has been leading and working with writers for a revival for the past 2 years.
Yes, we have been working on concepts of story, plots, and things like that.
I love that show.
It was a great show. Thank you.
However, Frankie Muniz has also shared about what he thinks about Malcolm in the Middle getting a reboot. So many shows have been rebooted, and so many shows shouldn't have been rebooted. So I don't want it to be just like one of those shows. It has to make sense. It has to be good. Though it does remain to be seen if we ever get a Malcolm in the Middle reboot. If Bryan Cranston thinks that a Malcolm in the Middle reboot or film could work, then I'm honestly excited to see what they can do. Overall, Malcolm in the Middle is not a show that's looked back on as one of the best sitcoms, but I think it should be. And I think we owe far more to Malcolm in the Middle than to shows like Friends or The Office. I love this show, and it's a show that I never get tired of watching, and I definitely recommend you to go revisit the show. Today, we've seen a lot of shows without a laugh track or studio audience, but I don't think none of it would have happened without Malcolm in the Middle.
Life is unfair.